In an ancient time filled with complexities, the king of Egypt, a figure of power and influence, approached the midwives who attended to the Hebrew women during the birth of their children with a grim purpose. Among these midwives, two women stood out for their name and dedication, Shiphrah and Puah. These midwives received a chilling order directly from the Pharaoh. While attending to the Hebrew women at the time of childbirth, they were to determine the sex of the newborn. If the baby turned out to be a male, they were to take his life. If it was a girl, she would be allowed to live. This directive was not just a display of the cruelty and control that the Pharaoh wished to exert over the Hebrews, but also an attempt to weaken and reduce the population of the people residing in Egypt. But the Pharaoh's mandate did not stop there. He extended his cruel edict to all his people, ordering that all newborn male children be thrown into the river, while daughters should be preserved. This dark chapter in the history of Israel's slavery in Egypt is just one example of how peoples have been subjugated and oppressed throughout history. It is a story that invites us to reflect on the deep wounds that slavery has left on humanity, a subject that, although difficult, is necessary to explore to better understand the injustices of the past and how these continue to affect our present. Today, we will delve into a detailed study on the slavery of Israel in Egypt, a narrative that not only reflects the struggle and resistance of an oppressed people, but also teaches us about the human capacity to overcome adversity. The history of slavery does not begin or end with the Hebrews in Egypt. On the other side of the world, centuries later, after the arrival of Christopher Columbus in America in 1492, the doors were opened to an era of exploitation and subjugation that would mark the beginning of one of the darkest periods of humanity. The island of Hispaniola, shared today by Haiti and the Dominican Republic, saw how the Taino Indians became some of the first victims of slavery in the New World. With the endorsement of the Spanish King Charles V, the transatlantic trade of human beings began, torn from their homes in Africa to be forced to work in degrading conditions in mines and plantations. This inhumane trade saw the transfer of more than 12 million people, mainly from West and Central Africa, to various parts of the American continent, leaving a deep wound that still resonates in our days. It is important to recognize that although the Spanish and Portuguese conquerors played a crucial role in the expansion of transatlantic slavery, the practice of subjugating human beings is much older and has manifested in almost all cultures and continents throughout history. From ancient writings in Mesopotamia to the complex slave societies of Greece and Rome, where figures like Aristotle saw slavery as a natural phenomenon necessary for the maintenance of certain lifestyles, slavery has been a constant dark presence in human history. Israel's struggle for freedom in Egypt is just one chapter in this long story of oppression and the search for freedom. Through this study, we seek not only to illuminate the dark corners of our collective past, but also to foster deep reflection on how we as a society can learn from these mistakes and work towards a future where the dignity and freedom of all human beings are respected and protected. Throughout time, the history of humanity has been marked by countless narratives of struggle, hope, and in many cases, oppression. Within these stories, that of the people of Israel occupies a notable place, especially for their periods of slavery, which not only forged their identity but also left an indelible mark on their historical and spiritual trajectory. Their first enslavement, one of the most significant and well documented, was under the yoke of the Egyptians, a key episode detailed in the book of Exodus. Dear listener, let's delve into the book of Exodus, the second text attributed to Moses, a narrative that not only continues the saga of Jacob's family but also acts as a bridge between the end of the book of Genesis and the beginning of a new era for Abraham's descendants. It is fascinating to observe how the first verse of Exodus picks up almost textually one of the last verses of Genesis, weaving an unbreakable bond between these two fundamental works of the Bible. Exodus not only recounts the odyssey of a group of people transforming into a nation under divine providence, but also highlights a heavenly plan, a divine purpose that guided the children of Israel to stay in Egypt, though not indefinitely. The plot unfolds from Jacob and his family's arrival in Egypt, driven by a severe famine, and Joseph's position as governor of Egypt, to the point where what began as a temporary stay out of necessity becomes the fulfillment of a divine prophecy. Jacob's family, initially composed of 70 members, not only survives but thrives, multiplying to form a robust and numerous nation. This spectacular growth, documented both in Genesis and Exodus, illustrates the transition from a simple family to a community with the strength and numbers sufficient to constitute itself as a nation. The book of Exodus, starting by listing the sons of Israel who entered Egypt with Jacob, introduces us to a story of transformation in faith, showing us how from the original 70 individuals, the Israelites grew to more than 600,000 men, not counting women and children, according to the divine census recorded in the book of Numbers. This multiplication is not only a testimony to their prosperity but also the beginning of an era of tribulation, marked by the emergence of a new Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. This change of power in Egypt marked the beginning of a dark period for the Israelites. Settled in the region of Goshen, a fertile land ideal for their flocks and crops, they lived separated from the Egyptians, partly by their own choice, guided by Joseph's plans, and partly due to the Egyptians' disdain for shepherds. The death of Joseph and the advent of a new king who had no memory of Joseph's contributions, however, radically altered their situation. This Pharaoh, probably from the dynasty of the Hyksos or shepherd kings, saw the growing population of Israelites not as an asset but as a threat, marking the beginning of their enslavement and suffering. It is important to note that although the Bible does not specify the names of the pharaohs of this era, historical clues suggest that the king who allowed Joseph to rise to a position of power could have belonged to the Hyksos, a dynasty of Semitic origin that ruled Egypt for centuries. This historical context provides a rich backdrop for understanding the complex relationship between the Israelites and the Egyptians, as well as the eventual oppression that Jacob's descendants would face in foreign lands. As we delve into these narratives, we are revealed not only the resilience of a people in the face of adversity but also the invisible hand of a divine purpose, weaving the threads of human history towards a destiny yet to be revealed. The story of the Israelites in Egypt, marked by divine promise, oppression, and the eventual search for liberation, invites us to reflect on the dynamics of power, faith, and resistance, which have not only shaped their identity but also that of countless communities through the centuries. Within this broad tapestry in ancient history, the figure of Amos-I emerges as a turning point for Egypt. This pharaoh is not only recognized for founding the new kingdom of Egypt but also for establishing a dynasty that would lead Egypt to its golden age, a period of splendor and expansion without precedent. However, this zenith would not be eternal, and over time, the empire would experience a decline from which it would never fully recover. This transition from glory to decline finds echoes in the biblical narrative of the Exodus, suggesting that Amos I, or perhaps one of his successors, could be the Pharaoh mentioned in the Bible who did not know Joseph. This ignorance was not merely anecdotal but marked a turning point in the relationship between the Egyptians and the Israelites. Under the new regime, the Israelites, settled in the north of Egypt and considered foreigners, began to be seen with suspicion and fear. The memory of Joseph, who had been a key figure in the Egyptian government and a savior during times of famine, faded, and with it, any sense of gratitude or debt towards his descendants. This new dynasty, seeking to assert its power and neutralize any potential threat, decided to subject the Israelites to severe enslavement. The Pharaoh's strategy, as narrated in verses 10 and 11 of the book of Exodus, was to prevent the multiplication of the Israelites and their possible alliance with enemies of Egypt in case of war. To this end, he imposed taskmasters over them who subjected them to forced labor, building store cities like Pithom and Ramses. The Bible does not detail the exact process through which the Israelites were enslaved, but in antiquity, unsustainable debts and the consequences of wars were common causes of slavery. Whether due to the inability to pay exorbitant tributes or as war tribute, the Israelites were plunged into cruel slavery, forced to build with bricks and endure increasingly harsh living conditions. Even when the Pharaoh intensified the oppression, denying the Israelites the straw necessary for brick making and demanding the same quota of production, the Israelite population not only resisted but continued to grow. This strength and growth, despite severe oppression, reflect a divine promise made to Abraham, as mentioned in Genesis 15:13, where God predicts that Abraham's descendants would reside and be oppressed in a foreign land for 400 years. Interestingly, Jewish tradition adds an even more bitter dimension to the enslavement of the Israelites in Egypt, suggesting that the cities they built were actually cities of misery, feudal constructions erected on sand and meant to be destroyed and rebuilt repeatedly, in an attempt to break their spirit. This cruel practice, beyond its practical function, aimed to embitter the lives of the Israelites, immersing them in an endless cycle of purposeless labor. The enslavement of the Israelites under the new kingdom of Egypt, marked by forced construction, deprivation of basic resources, and increasing oppression, failed to extinguish their growth or spirit. On the contrary, their population continued to increase, a testament both to their resilience and to the presence of a divine blessing that accompanied them even in the darkest moments of their history. This period of adversity not only fulfilled a prophecy but also set the stage for one of the most powerful and enduring liberation narratives in human history. The labor to which the Israelites were subjected in Egypt, an endless task with no clear purpose beyond oppression and demoralization, marks one of the darkest episodes in the history of slavery. But it is within this context of adversity and subjugation that an act of defiance and faith stands out in verses 15 and 16 of the book of Exodus. In this section of the biblical narrative, the Pharaoh of Egypt, in his attempt to control and eventually exterminate the Israelite people, summons the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, and orders them to kill all the newborn male children while allowing the girls to live. This malicious plan was not simply an act of cruelty, it was a calculated attempt to cut off the line of descent of the Israelites, directly affecting the divine promise of a great future for the chosen people, and ultimately, the messianic lineage that would lead to the birth of Jesus Christ. The Pharaoh, seeing that physical oppression had not diminished the spirit nor the population of the Israelites, resorted to an even more perverse tactic, directly targeting the next generation. The names of the midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, meaning beauty and splendor respectively, reflect not only the virtues admired in Egyptian society but also the irony of their mission, given their inherent nobility contrasted with the darkness of the order they received. This episode leads us to reflect on the nature of anti-Semitism, a deep and persistent hatred that has afflicted the Jewish people throughout history. This prejudice, of satanic origin according to theological interpretations, is alien to the spirit of any divine and Christian teaching, which advocates for love and acceptance. The act of the midwives, who chose to disobey the Pharaoh and save the children, becomes a powerful testimony of faith and fear of God over the fear of man. The midwives' response to the Pharaoh, attributing their inability to fulfill his mandate to the strength and quickness of the Hebrew women's childbirths, demonstrates not only their cunning but also their deep reverence and faith in God. This divinely inspired act of disobedience not only saved lives but also ensured the continuation of the divine purpose for Israel. As a result of their faith, God blessed the midwives in such a way that the people multiplied and grew very mighty, and specifically, He made them houses, an expression that goes beyond the mere construction of physical structures to suggest the building of lineages and the perpetuation of their legacy within the people of God. The Pharaoh's final attempt to exterminate the sons of Israel by casting them into the river represents the culmination of his cruelty, but also marks the starting point of divine intervention in an even more direct and miraculous manner, setting the stage for the birth of Moses, who would become the liberator of Israel. This narrative, which unfolds from oppression to resistance and eventual liberation, not only illustrates the resilience of the Jewish people in the face of adversity but also the faithfulness of God to His promises, a recurring theme in the biblical narrative that continues to inspire hope across generations. When the Pharaoh of Egypt faced the failure of his initial extermination plan, secretly executed through the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, who refused to comply with his mandate to kill the newborn males, he opted for a much more draconian and open strategy. This new mandate, described in the book of Exodus, involved a direct order to the entire Egyptian people to cast all newly born male children of the Israelites into the river, marking a shift towards a public and unrestricted approach to genocide. This change in tactic not only reveals the Pharaoh's desperation to control the growing Israelite population but also his willingness to involve his entire nation in the act of oppression. This turn towards an open and collective extermination of the Israelites evokes memories of other dark moments in human history, where leaders and regimes have sought to eradicate entire groups of people. Herod's attempt to kill all the male infants in Bethlehem at the time of Jesus' birth, in an effort to eliminate the newly born Messiah, shares unsettling parallels with the Pharaoh's plan. Similarly, the Holocaust, orchestrated by Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime, sought the systematic annihilation of the Jewish people during World War II. These events, though separated by millennia, underline a recurring pattern of persecution and violence against the Jews, a testimony to the resilience of these people in the face of repeated attempts at destruction. The story of Israel is indeed a testimony to divine presence and protection throughout the centuries. Despite facing slavery, exile, and genocide, the nation of Israel has not only survived but has flourished. Jeremiah 31:35 and 36 offers a divine promise of the constancy and permanence of Israel, comparing the unchangeability of celestial laws with the indestructibility of the Jewish people. Israel's resilience, its return to national sovereignty in 1948 after nearly 2 millennia of diaspora, and its subsequent rise to one of the world's most prosperous and technologically advanced nations are seen by many as fulfillments of biblical promises and evidence of God's reality in human history. However, the relationship between God and Israel, as per the New Testament, especially in Paul's writings in Romans 11:25-27, suggests a complex interplay of judgment, mercy, and ultimate restoration. Paul speaks of a partial hardening of Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, anticipating a future in which all Israel will be saved. This passage reflects the conviction that despite the challenges and the apparent distance between Israel and its recognition of the Messiah, there is a divine plan for their redemption and restoration. This biblical and historical panorama urges us to reflect on the importance of praying for peace and protection for Israel, recognizing its unique place in God's plan for humanity. It also reminds us of the need to resist any form of hate or discrimination, including anti-Semitism, recognizing instead the inherent dignity and value of all people and nations in the pursuit of peaceful and respectful coexistence. In conclusion, the story of Israel, from its enslavement in Egypt to its establishment as a nation in the 20th century, is a testimony of survival, resistance, and ongoing faith in divine promises. This narrative not only offers lessons on providence and promise, but also on the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. And so we come to the end of this presentation. Thank you for being part of our channel, a space where we seek to share wisdom and reflections on faith. I send you a warm greeting and a big hug. Until next time, and may God bless you.